The blood on her wedding dress had long since turned brown, but Adelaide Brooks could still see it in her nightmares, still feel the weight of betrayal crushing her chest like a boulder rolled down from the mountains. She stood behind the counter of her mercantile in Bentonville, Arkansas, watching a cowboy browse her shelves with the same wary suspicion she had perfected over 3 years of keeping every man at arm's length. It was the spring of 1878, and the town had grown considerably since she had arrived broken and alone after fleeing Missouri. The mercantile had been her salvation, a way to survive without depending on anyone, especially not a man. She kept her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, wore dresses buttoned to her throat, and made sure every transaction was quick and impersonal. The cowboy picked up a bag of flour, testing its weight. He was tall, with sun-darkened skin and dark hair that needed cutting. His clothes were worn but clean, and he moved with a quiet confidence that made Adelaide grip the edge of the counter. She had seen confidence before. She had trusted confidence before. "How much for the flour, madam?" His voice was deep and polite, and when he looked at her, his gray eyes were steady but not intrusive. 50 cents, she said curtly, already calculating his change before he even reached into his pocket. He placed exact coins on the counter. "Thank you, madam. I am Arthur Kane. Just bought the property east of town, planning to raise horses." Adelaide said nothing, merely nodded and pulled the coins toward her. She did not offer her name. She did not ask about his plans. She had learned that conversations led to familiarity, and familiarity led to trust, and trust led to devastation. Arthur Kane did not seem offended by her coldness. He simply tipped his hat and left, the door closing softly behind him. Adelaide watched him mount a fine bay gelding and ride east, and then she turned back to her ledgers, forcing herself to forget the encounter. But Arthur Kane did not let himself be forgotten. He returned 2 days later for nails and leather strapping, 3 days after that for coffee and beans. Each time he was polite and respectful, never lingering longer than necessary, never asking questions that were too personal. Yet somehow, in those brief exchanges, Adelaide began to notice small things about him. The way he always cleaned his boots before entering her store. The way he spoke gently to his horse. The way his hands, calloused and strong, handled her merchandise with surprising care. "You are rebuilding the old Patterson place." Mrs. Henderson, one of Adelaide's regular customers, asked Arthur one afternoon when they happened to be in the store together. "Yes, madam," Arthur replied. "The house needs work, but the land is good. I have 6 horses already, planning to build up a breeding operation." "That is ambitious for one man alone," Mrs. Henderson said with the blunt curiosity of someone who had lived in small towns her entire life. "I am used to working alone," Arthur said, and something in his tone suggested there was a story there, one he was not eager to share. Adelaide found herself listening despite her determination not to care. She rang up Mrs. Henderson's purchases with mechanical efficiency, but her ears tracked the conversation. "You should come to the church social next month," Mrs. Henderson suggested. "Good way to meet your neighbors properly." "Perhaps," Arthur said noncommittally, and Adelaide felt an unexpected flicker of relief that he was as reluctant about social gatherings as she was. After Mrs. Henderson left, Arthur approached the counter with a small bag of peppermint sticks. "For myself," he said, almost sheepishly. "I have a weakness for them." Adelaide took his money, and for just a moment their fingers brushed. She jerked her hand back as if burned, and something flickered in Arthur's eyes. Not anger, not even hurt, just understanding, as if he recognized her fear and accepted it without question. "Have a good day, Miss Brooks," he said quietly, and left. Adelaide stared at the closed door, her heart pounding. She had not told him her name, which meant he had asked someone, which meant he was interested, which meant she needed to be more careful. She could not afford to let anyone close. Not again. Not after what Thomas and his brothers had done. The memories crashed over her like a flash flood in the Arkansas hills. Thomas Yardley, with his charming smile and smooth words, courting her so sweetly in Kansas City. The proposal, the planning, the dress she had sewn herself with trembling excitement. And then the wedding day when she discovered it had all been a cruel game. Thomas had bet his brothers he could convince the plain, too serious Adelaide to marry him. They had burst into the church laughing, telling her the truth while she stood at the altar, while the whole congregation watched in horror and pity. But worse than the humiliation was what came after. When she tried to leave, Thomas had grabbed her arm, his face twisted with rage that she dared to embarrass him by running. His brothers had joined in, and if the minister had not intervened, if the sheriff had not been in attendance, she did not know what would have happened. She still remembered Thomas's voice, cold and threatening. "You tell anyone about this and we will find you. We will make you sorry you were ever born." She had fled that night, taking only what she could carry, and had not stopped until she reached Bentonville. She had used her small inheritance to buy the failing mercantile, and had rebuilt it through sheer determination and 18-hour days. She had made herself untouchable, unapproachable safe, and she would not let one polite cowboy with kind eyes undo all of that. But Arthur Kane was persistent in the gentlest possible way. He came to her store once or twice a week, always for legitimate purchases, never staying long. He never tried to force conversation, but he always offered a quiet greeting and a genuine thank you. He never commented on her coldness, never seemed frustrated by her one-word responses. One morning in June, Adelaide was struggling to move a crate of canned goods that had been delivered to the wrong spot. She had managed to shift it a few inches when the door opened and Arthur walked in. "Let me help with that," he said immediately, moving toward the crate. "I can manage," Adelaide said sharply, putting herself between him and the crate. Arthur stopped instantly, hands raised slightly. "I am sure you can," he said calmly. "But it would be my privilege to assist if you would allow it." There was something about the way he phrased it, as if he understood that her independence was not stubbornness, but survival, that made Adelaide hesitate. She looked at his open, honest face, at the genuine offer of help with no expectation of anything in return, and slowly stepped aside. "Thank you," she forced herself to say. Arthur moved the crate with ease, positioning it exactly where Adelaide indicated. He did not linger afterward, did not use the moment to try to start a conversation. He simply brushed off his hands, purchased the rope he had come for, and left. Adelaide stood in the empty store, feeling something she had not felt in 3 years. A tiny crack in the wall she had built around herself. As summer deepened and the Arkansas heat turned oppressive, Adelaide noticed more about Arthur through the small window her wariness allowed. She learned from other customers that he worked dawn to dusk on his property, that he had transformed the dilapidated Patterson place into a respectable horse ranch, that he was scrupulously honest in all his dealings. She learned that he had come from Texas, that he had lost his family in some tragedy he did not discuss, that he kept to himself, but was never rude or unfriendly. She also noticed that despite Mrs. Henderson's best efforts and those of several other matchmaking townswomen, Arthur showed no interest in courting anyone. He attended church occasionally, but always sat alone and left immediately after the service. He was polite to the young women who fluttered around him, but gave them no encouragement. Adelaide told herself she did not care. What Arthur Kane did with his personal life was none of her concern. Yet she found herself watching for him, found herself making sure she had the specific supplies he preferred in stock, found herself smoothing her hair before he came in even though she had no reason to know his schedule. In late July, a traveling merchant came through town, a slick-talking man named Barnaby who set up shop in the town square, claiming to sell miracle tonics and exotic goods. Adelaide watched from her store window as he charmed coins from people who could barely afford his inflated prices. Something about him made her skin crawl, made her think of Thomas and his false smiles. Arthur came into the store that afternoon, and Adelaide surprised herself by speaking first. "You have not bought any of that charlatan snake oil, I hope." Arthur's eyebrows rose slightly at her unsolicited comment, but his expression remained neutral. "No, madam. I learned a long time ago that if something sounds too good to be true, it usually is." "A wise policy," Adelaide said, then flushed at her own forwardness and turned back to her inventory list. "Miss Brooks," Arthur said, his voice careful, "I wanted to ask if you might have any spare lumber. I am building a new corral and find myself short. I will pay fair price, naturally." Adelaide considered. She had some lumber in the back, left over from repairs she had done last winter. "I have some. You can come look at it, see if it suits your needs." She led him through the back room, intensely aware of his presence behind her, of the way the small space seemed even smaller with him in it. She showed him the lumber stack, and Arthur examined it with a practiced eye. "This is perfect," he said. "What do you want for it?" Adelaide named a price, and Arthur nodded without haggling. As he gathered the lumber, Adelaide found herself speaking again, the words coming out before she could stop them. "Why did you come to Bentonville?" Arthur paused, a plank balanced on his shoulder. For a long moment, she thought he would not answer, and she almost took the question back. Then he said quietly, "I needed a fresh start. Sometimes a man has to leave the past behind to have any hope of a future." The words resonated so deeply with Adelaide's own experience that she felt tears prick her eyes. She turned away quickly, pretending to organize some tools. "Yes," she whispered. "Sometimes that is necessary." They did not speak more, but something had shifted. A small, tentative understanding had passed between them. August brought thunderstorms that rolled across the hills like cavalry charges. Adelaide was closing up the store one evening when the sky opened up with sudden violence. Rain hammered the roof, and lightning split the darkness. She was locking the front door when she saw a figure running toward the store through the deluge. It was Arthur, soaked to the skin. She opened the door without thinking, and he stumbled in, water streaming from his hat. "I apologize," he gasped. "My horse threw a shoe just outside town. I was trying to make it to the livery when the storm hit." Adelaide grabbed a blanket from her supply shelf and thrust it at him. "You will catch your death. Dry yourself." Arthur took the blanket gratefully, wiping his face. "Thank you. I did not mean to impose." "The storm should pass soon," Adelaide said, trying to sound businesslike even though her heart was racing. Being alone with Arthur in the closed store felt dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the warmth that spread through her chest when she looked at him. Thunder cracked overhead and Adelaide flinched. Arthur noticed. "You are afraid of storms." "No," Adelaide said automatically, then reconsidered. Something about the moment, the intimacy of the rain-darkened store and the vulnerability of his drenched state made her want to be honest. "Yes. A little. When I was a child, a tornado destroyed my family's barn. I was inside. My father pulled me out just in time." "That must have been terrifying," Arthur said, his voice full of genuine sympathy. "It was a long time ago," Adelaide said, wrapping her arms around herself. They stood in silence, listening to the rain. Then Arthur said, "My family died in a fire. My parents and my younger sister. I was away working on a neighboring ranch. By the time I got back, there was nothing I could do. Adelaide's breath caught. Arthur, I am so sorry. It was 5 years ago, Arthur said, but I still dream about it sometimes. Still wonder if I could have done something different, been there somehow. You could not have known, Adelaide said softly. No, Arthur agreed, but knowing that does not always make it easier. He looked at her, and in his eyes, Adelaide saw a reflection of her own pain, her own struggle to move past events that had shattered her world. We cannot change the past, Miss Brooks. We can only decide what we do with the present. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Adelaide wanted to tell him everything, wanted to explain why she was the way she was, why she could not trust, could not open herself up to the possibility of being hurt again. But the words stuck in her throat, too frightening to speak. The storm passed, and Arthur left, and Adelaide locked up with shaking hands. That night she lay awake, thinking about loss and fear and the quiet cowboy who seemed to understand both. September arrived with cooler temperatures and the first hints of autumn color in the trees. Arthur continued his regular visits to the mercantile, but now there was an easiness between them that had not existed before. Adelaide found herself smiling occasionally, found herself asking him questions about his horses and his plans. She learned that he had a gift with animals, that he could gentle the wildest horse with patience and kindness. She learned that he loved the land, that he dreamed of building something lasting and good. And slowly, so slowly she barely noticed it happening, she began to look forward to his visits. Began to feel disappointed on days when he did not come. Began to trust, just a little, just enough to let her guard down by inches. One afternoon, Arthur came in with a troubled expression. Miss Brooks, I need to warn you about something. That traveling merchant, Barnaby. I saw him trying to break into the bank last night. I reported him to the sheriff, and they ran him out of town, but I wanted you to know. Make sure you are locking up carefully. Adelaide felt a rush of gratitude that Arthur had thought of her safety, had taken the time to warn her. Thank you. I appreciate you telling me. Arthur nodded, then seemed to gather his courage. Miss Brooks, I wonder if I might ask you something. Adelaide tensed automatically but forced herself to stay calm. Yes. Would you consider having dinner with me? Not in town, he added quickly, seeing her expression. I understand you value your privacy, but I could cook something at my place and you could see the horses. No expectations, no pressure, just two people sharing a meal. Every instinct Adelaide had screamed at her to say no, to protect herself, to maintain the distance that kept her safe. But another part of her, a part that had been growing stronger over the months, whispered that this was Arthur. Arthur, who had never pushed, never demanded, never done anything to earn her mistrust. Arthur, who had his own pain and his own scars and understood what it meant to be broken. I need to think about it, she heard herself say. Arthur's face showed no disappointment, only understanding. Of course, take all the time you need. The invitation stands whenever you are ready. That night, Adelaide paced her small apartment above the mercantile, wrestling with herself. She thought about Thomas, about the cruelty and the betrayal. But she also thought about Arthur, about his kindness and patience, about the way he had earned her trust one small interaction at a time, never asking for more than she could give. Could she take this risk? Could she open herself up to the possibility of being hurt again? The answer came to her as she watched the moon rise over Bentonville. She could not live in fear forever. Arthur had not asked her to marry him, had not even asked to court her properly. He had simply invited her to dinner. One meal. One small step toward connection. The next day, when Arthur came in for his weekly supplies, Adelaide took a deep breath and said, Saturday. I will come for dinner on Saturday. The smile that lit up Arthur's face was worth every ounce of fear coursing through her veins. Saturday arrived too quickly. Adelaide changed her dress 3 times before settling on a simple blue calico that brought out her eyes. She told herself this was not courting, this was just dinner with a neighbor, but her racing heart knew better. Arthur's property was beautiful in the golden afternoon light. The house had been completely restored, painted white with green shutters. The corrals were sturdy and well built, housing a dozen beautiful horses that watched Adelaide with curious eyes. Arthur came out to meet her, wearing a clean shirt and looking nervous in a way that made Adelaide feel slightly better about her own anxiety. "Welcome. I am glad you came. Your place is lovely," Adelaide said, and meant it. Arthur showed her around, introducing her to each horse with obvious pride. Adelaide found herself relaxing as she petted the soft noses and listened to Arthur explain bloodlines and training methods. Here, away from town and prying eyes, she felt like she could breathe. Dinner was simple but good. Beef stew and fresh bread that Arthur admitted he had bribed Mrs. Henderson to teach him to make. They ate on his porch, watching the sun set, and talked about everything and nothing. Arthur told her about growing up in Texas, about learning to ride before he could walk, about his father's love of the land. Adelaide found herself sharing stories about her childhood in Kansas, about her mother's garden, about her dreams of having her own business. As the sky darkened and stars appeared, Arthur said carefully, "Adelaide, may I call you Adelaide? I feel like Miss Brooks is too formal for friends." Friends. The word was both reassuring and disappointing. "Yes," Adelaide said, "and I will call you Arthur, not Mr. Kane." "We are making progress," Arthur said with a gentle smile. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Adelaide found herself speaking words she had not planned. "I was engaged once. 3 years ago in Missouri. It did not end well." Arthur did not press for details, just waited patiently. Adelaide took a shaking breath and continued. "It was all a lie, a bet. He humiliated me in front of everyone, and when I tried to leave, he and his brothers became violent. I had to run. I had to disappear because he threatened me." "Adelaide," Arthur said, his voice rough with emotion. "I am so sorry. No one deserves that. No one. It made me afraid," Adelaide whispered. "Afraid to trust anyone, especially men. I built walls to keep myself safe, and I thought I would live behind them forever." "What changed?" Arthur asked softly. Adelaide looked at him, at his honest face and kind eyes, at the man who had spent months earning her trust without even knowing the full story of why it was so hard to give. "You changed. You showed me that not all men are like Thomas. That patience and kindness and respect are real things, not just tricks to get what you want." Arthur reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement, and took her hand. His grip was warm and solid and safe. "I would never hurt you, Adelaide. I cannot promise that life will not hurt you, because that is beyond my control. But I can promise that I will never lie to you, never betray you, never use your trust as a weapon. You have my word." Tears streamed down Adelaide's face, years of pain and fear releasing in that moment. "I want to believe you, I want to trust you, but I am so afraid." "Then trust me a little at a time," Arthur said, his thumb gently stroking her hand. "Just like you have been doing. I am not going anywhere, Adelaide. I will be here, earning your trust one day at a time for as long as it takes." And in that moment, Adelaide made a choice. She squeezed his hand and said, "I would like to try. I would like to see where this goes." Arthur's smile was brilliant in the starlight. "So would I." The courtship that followed was unlike anything Adelaide had imagined. Arthur continued to be patient and respectful, but now there was an openness between them that had not existed before. He came to dinner at her apartment above the Mercantile. She spent Sunday afternoons at his ranch, learning to ride the gentle mare he had chosen specifically for her. They talked about their pasts and their dreams. They laughed together, something Adelaide had not done in years. October brought harvest festivals and cooling temperatures. Arthur asked if he could escort Adelaide to the church social, and she surprised herself by agreeing. Walking into the town hall on his arm, seeing the surprised faces of her neighbors, Adelaide felt a flicker of her old fear. But Arthur stayed close, his presence steady and reassuring, and when she needed to step outside for air, he came with her without question. "This is hard for you," he said as they stood in the cool night air. "Yes," Adelaide admitted. "People talking, speculating, it reminds me of before." "Do you want to leave?" Arthur asked immediately. Adelaide considered, then shook her head. "No, I am tired of letting fear control me. I am tired of hiding." Arthur smiled and offered his arm. "Then let us go back in and give them something good to talk about." As autumn deepened, Adelaide found herself falling in love. It was terrifying and exhilarating and completely different from what she had felt for Thomas. This was not the giddy excitement of infatuation, but something deeper and more solid. This was trust and respect and genuine affection built on a foundation of time and patience. In November, Arthur asked if he could court her properly, officially, and Adelaide said yes. He was careful with her, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. Their first kiss came on a cold evening in December, standing in the barn at his ranch while snow fell softly outside. It was gentle and sweet and perfect, and Adelaide felt the last of her walls crumble. "I love you," Arthur said, his forehead resting against hers. "I have loved you for months, but I wanted to wait until you were ready to hear it." "I love you too," Adelaide whispered, the words both frightening and liberating. "I did not think I could ever say those words again, but I do." "I love you, Arthur Kane." Winter passed in a blur of happiness. Arthur spent Christmas with Adelaide, and she spent New Year's at his ranch. They made plans for the future, talking about expanding the mercantile and the horse ranch, about building a life together. In March of 1879, exactly 1 year after they had first met, Arthur proposed. Not with grand gestures or public displays, but quietly, in Adelaide's mercantile after closing time. He got down on one knee and said, "Adelaide Brooks, you are the strongest, bravest woman I have ever known. You have overcome so much, and you have trusted me with your heart even though that trust was hard-won. I promise to spend every day of my life proving worthy of that trust. Will you marry me?" Adelaide looked at him, at the man who had earned her trust one day at a time, who had shown her that love could be patient and kind and real. She thought about how far she had come from the broken woman who had arrived in Bentonville, how Arthur had helped her heal without even trying to fix her. "Yes," she said, pulling him to his feet. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married in April, in the same church where Adelaide had started attending services again. It was a small ceremony, nothing like the elaborate wedding she had planned with Thomas. But it was real and full of love, and when Arthur slipped the ring on her finger and kissed her as his wife, Adelaide felt only joy. The first year of marriage was an adjustment, but Arthur's patience did not end at the altar. He understood that Adelaide still had moments of fear, times when old memories surfaced and made her doubt. He never grew frustrated, never demanded that she simply get over it. He just held her and reminded her that he was not going anywhere, that his love was constant and true. Adelaide, for her part, learned to let herself be vulnerable, to accept help and affection without always bracing for betrayal. She learned that trust was not a destination but a journey, something she and Arthur built together every day through small acts of kindness and faithfulness. The mercantile and the horse ranch both flourished. Adelaide hired help for the store so she could spend more time at the ranch, discovering that she loved working with the horses as much as Arthur did. They became partners in every sense of the word, making decisions together, supporting each other's dreams. In the spring of 1880, Adelaide discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. Arthur held her while she cried, understanding without words that she was afraid of bringing a child into a world that had hurt her so badly. "Our child will grow up knowing love," Arthur promised. "Knowing that trust is not a weakness but a strength. Knowing that family means safety and support, not betrayal and pain. We will give them everything we did not have." Their son was born in December, healthy and strong. They named him James after Arthur's father. Holding the tiny baby, Adelaide felt a fierce protective love that dwarfed everything she had experienced before. This was what mattered. This family they had built together, this life they had created from the ashes of their pasts. The years flowed by, marked by growth and happiness. James grew into a lively, curious boy who loved horses and followed his father everywhere. In 1883, they welcomed a daughter, Catherine, who had Adelaide's dark hair and Arthur's gray eyes. The house Arthur had built grew to accommodate their expanding family, and the sound of children's laughter filled rooms that had once echoed with loneliness. Adelaide never forgot what she had overcome, but the memories lost their power to hurt her. Thomas Yardley became nothing more than a name from a past that no longer defined her. She was Adelaide Kane now, wife and mother and successful businesswoman. She was loved and trusted and safe. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1889, Arthur took Adelaide riding into the hills above Bentonville. They sat watching the sunset, just as they had on their first dinner together. "You remember how terrified you were that night?" Arthur asked, his arm around her shoulders. "I remember," Adelaide said. "I remember thinking I was making a terrible mistake, that I would regret trusting you." "And do you regret it?" Adelaide looked at her husband, at the man who had earned her trust one day at a time and had never once broken it. She thought about their children playing at home, about the life they had built together, about the love that grew stronger with each passing year. "Not for a single moment," she said, and kissed him as the sun painted the Arkansas sky in shades of gold and crimson. They returned home as darkness fell. James and Catherine ran to greet them, full of stories about their day. Adelaide gathered them close, breathing in the scent of soap and childhood, feeling Arthur's solid presence behind her. This was her happily ever after, she thought. Not perfect, because life was never perfect, but real and good and worth every moment of fear she had faced to get here. Arthur had shown her that trust was not something to be avoided, but something to be carefully, deliberately given to someone worthy of it. And he had proved himself worthy every single day. As they put the children to bed and settled in for the evening, Adelaide reached for Arthur's hand. He squeezed back immediately, the gesture as natural as breathing after so many years together. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" Arthur asked, though his smile suggested he knew, "For being patient, for earning my trust one day at a time, for showing me that love is real." Arthur pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "Thank you for trusting me, for taking the risk, for building this life with me." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn low. Outside, Bentonville was quiet under the stars. The mercantile would open tomorrow, and Arthur would work with the horses, and the children would need breakfast and attention and love. Life would continue in its beautiful, ordinary way. But for now, in this moment, Adelaide allowed herself to simply be happy. She had survived betrayal and fear. She had learned to trust again, and she had found a love that was worth everything it had cost her to open her heart. The cowboy had earned her trust one day at a time, and in doing so, he had given her back her life. And that, Adelaide thought as she rested her head on Arthur's shoulder, was the greatest gift she could ever have received. Years continued to pass in peaceful contentment. James grew tall and strong, inheriting his father's way with horses and his mother's business sense. Catherine proved to be both gentle and fierce, with a gift for healing injured animals and a determination that reminded everyone of Adelaide. In 1892, they welcomed another son, Thomas, named not for Adelaide's past but for Arthur's grandfather, reclaiming the name with love and joy. The horse ranch became known throughout Arkansas and beyond for the quality of its stock. Adelaide expanded the mercantile into a thriving business that served not just Bentonville but surrounding communities. They were respected members of the town, their story of patient courtship and devoted marriage becoming something of a legend among the younger generation. But Adelaide never took any of it for granted. She remembered too well what it was like to have nothing, to trust no one, to live behind walls of fear. Every morning when she woke beside Arthur, every evening when they gathered their children for dinner, every moment of ordinary happiness was precious to her. In 1895, James married a sweet girl from Little Rock and brought her to live on the ranch. Adelaide watched her son with his bride and saw echoes of herself and Arthur, saw the way he treated his wife with respect and kindness, and knew that they had broken the cycle of pain. Their children would never know betrayal at the hands of those they loved. They would grow up understanding that trust was sacred and love was real. Catherine announced her intention to become a veterinarian, a bold choice for a young woman, but one that Adelaide supported wholeheartedly. She had raised her daughter to be independent and strong, to know her worth, and she was proud of the woman Catherine was becoming. Young Thomas was still finding his way, but at 13 he showed promise as both a horseman and a scholar. Arthur spent hours with him, teaching him not just about animals and land, but about integrity and honor, about being the kind of man who earned trust rather than demanded it. On a warm evening in June of 1896, Adelaide and Arthur sat on their porch watching the sunset, much as they had done countless times before. Their children were scattered about the property, James working in the barn, Catherine reading under a tree, Thomas practicing his roping. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" Adelaide asked, leaning against Arthur's shoulder. "What do you mean?" Arthur's arm came around her automatically. "If you had not been so patient, if you had pushed or demanded or expected me to just get over my past. If you had been like other men." Arthur was quiet for a moment, then said, "But I could not have been any other way. Not with you. From the first moment I saw you in that mercantile, so weary and wounded, I knew that you were someone special, someone worth waiting for. I did not earn your trust because I had some clever plan. I earned it because you deserved to be treated with respect and care, and I could not have lived with myself if I had done anything else." Adelaide turned to look at him, this man who had changed her life so completely. Silver threaded his dark hair now, and lines crinkled around his eyes, but he was still the same Arthur who had bought flour from her 18 years ago. Still patient, still kind, still utterly trustworthy. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you too," Arthur replied. "I always have. I always will." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant colors, Adelaide thought about the journey that had brought her here. The pain of betrayal, the fear that had nearly destroyed her, the slow rebuilding of her ability to trust. And Arthur, always Arthur, earning that trust one day at a time until it became as natural as breathing. She had been broken, but she had healed. She had been afraid, but she had found courage. She had lost her ability to trust, but she had learned to trust again, in the best possible way, with the best possible man. Their story was not one of love at first sight or grand romantic gestures. It was a story of patience and persistence, of small kindnesses that built into something unshakable. It was a story of healing and hope, of second chances and earned trust. And as Adelaide sat with Arthur in the gathering darkness, surrounded by the life they had built together, she knew that every moment of fear, every day of patience, every small step toward trust had been worth it. They had created something beautiful from broken pieces, something lasting from shattered dreams. The cowboy had earned her trust one day at a time, and in return, she had given him her heart. And that trust, that love, had become the foundation of a life richer and fuller than either of them could have imagined. As stars began to appear overhead, Adelaide squeezed Arthur's hand. He squeezed back, and they sat together in perfect contentment, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something precious from their meeting. This was love, Adelaide thought. Not the false, cruel imitation she had experienced before, but the real thing. Love that was patient and kind. Love that earned trust and honored it. Love that lasted through all the days and years, constant and true. And she had found it here in Bentonville, Arkansas, with a cowboy who had understood that trust was not something to be demanded, but something to be earned, one day at a time, with patience and care and unwavering devotion. The night deepened around them, but Adelaide felt no fear. She was home, in every sense of the word. Home in Arthur's arms, home in the life they had built, home in the trust that bound them together more surely than any chains. They had overcome their pasts and created a future filled with love and family and unshakable trust. And as they finally rose and went inside to the warmth of their home and the embrace of their children, Adelaide knew that this was her true happy ending. Not perfect, but real. Not easy, but earned. Not given freely, but built carefully, day by day, with patience and love and absolute trust. And that made it more valuable than anything else in the world.